Sarah Martinez clutched her purse tighter as she hurried down the dimly lit street. The rain had started an hour ago, turning the cracked sidewalks of downtown Denver into slippery hazards. She was already 20 minutes late for her shift at the diner, and her boss had warned her about tardiness. One more strike and she would lose the only job keeping her small apartment. The sound of footsteps behind her made her pulse quicken. She had noticed the two men following her for 3 blocks now. They wore dark hoodies and walked with the confident swagger of people who owned these streets after dark. Sarah knew enough about this neighborhood to recognize trouble when she saw it. She ducked into the first business she could find, a small pawn shop with bars on the windows. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and she immediately felt the weight of several pairs of eyes on her. The shop was cramped and filled with the smell of old leather and metal polish. Glass cases lined the walls, displaying everything from jewelry to electronics to what looked like military medals. Behind the counter stood a man who made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with long black hair pulled back and skin that spoke of Native American heritage. His dark eyes assessed her with an intensity that made her feel both nervous and strangely safe. Tattoos covered his muscular arms, and a thin scar ran from his left temple to his jaw. "We're closed," he said, his voice deep and gravelly. Sarah glanced back through the window. The two men were standing across the street, pretending to look at their phones while clearly watching the pawn shop. Her heart hammered against her ribs as panic set in. She had nowhere else to go, no one to call for help. "Please," she whispered, then louder. "I need your help." The man's expression didn't change, but she caught something shift in his eyes. "Lady, I said we're closed. You need to leave." That's when Sarah saw them pushing through the door behind her. The bell chimed again, more aggressively this time. She spun around to face the two men who had been following her. The first was thin with greasy hair and a face marked by old acne scars. The second was stockier with prison tattoos covering his neck and hands. "There you are, beautiful," the thin one said with a yellow-toothed grin. "You shouldn't run from us like that." "We just want to talk," Sarah's mind raced. She was trapped between these two dangerous men and a pawnshop owner, who clearly wanted nothing to do with her problem. But something desperate and instinctive took over. She turned back to the man behind the counter and made a choice that would change everything. "Pretend you recognize me, or we both die," she warned in a low, urgent voice. The words tumbled out before she could think them through. She had no idea who this man was or what kind of trouble he might bring. But the two men behind her radiated a violence that made her skin crawl. She could feel their eyes on her back, could sense them moving closer. The pawnshop owner's reaction was subtle but immediate. His posture straightened slightly, and his hand moved toward something behind the counter. Sarah couldn't see what it was, but the movement was fluid and practiced. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there moments before. "I was wondering when you'd come by." The relief that flooded through her was so intense she nearly collapsed. But she forced herself to play along, stepping closer to the counter as if they were old friends. "Sorry I'm late," she managed, her voice only slightly shaky. Traffic was terrible. Behind her, she heard the thin man curse under his breath. "You didn't tell us you had a boyfriend, sweetheart." Sarah felt the man behind the counter's attention shift to the two intruders. When he spoke, his voice carried a new edge that made the hair on her arm stand up. "Is there something you gentlemen need? Because if not, I've got business to discuss with my lady here." The stocky man took a step forward. "Your lady? That's interesting, because we've been getting to know Sarah here for the past few blocks. Real friendly-like. That so?" The pawnshop owner moved from behind the counter with a fluid grace that reminded Sarah of a predator. Now she could see he was even taller than she'd thought, probably 6'4", with the kind of build that spoke of serious physical work or training. "And what exactly did you boys want to discuss with her?" The thin man's hand moved toward his jacket, but he stopped when he saw how the pawnshop owner was watching him. There was something in those dark eyes that promised violence if pushed too far. "Just wanted to ask her a few questions," the stocky man said, but his confidence was starting to waver. "Nothing that concerns you." "See, that's where you're wrong." The man stepped closer to Sarah, his presence solid and reassuring. "Anything that concerns her concerns me. So why don't you tell me what this is really about?" Sarah could feel the tension in the room building like electricity before a storm. She had no idea what she'd stumbled into, but she was beginning to realize that her desperate plea might have consequences she hadn't considered. The man beside her radiated a quiet danger that was different from the crude threat posed by her followers. This was controlled professional menace. The two men exchanged glances, and Sarah saw uncertainty flicker across their faces. Whatever they had expected, it wasn't this. The thin man's hand moved away from his jacket. "Must be some mistake," he said finally. "We'll just be going." "Good choice," the pawnshop owner replied, but he didn't relax until both men had backed out of the store. The bell chimed once more as the door closed behind them. Sarah watched through the window as they hurried away, frequently looking back over their shoulders. Only when they disappeared around a corner did she allow herself to breathe normally again. "Thank you," she whispered, turning to face the man who had just saved her. "I don't know what would have happened if—" "You don't know me," he interrupted, his voice back to its original coldness. "And you just involved me in something I didn't ask for." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. She was beginning to understand that her desperate gamble might have traded one danger for another. The man studying her with those intense dark eyes was clearly not someone to be trifled with. "I'm sorry," she said. "I was scared and I didn't know what else to do." He studied her for a long moment and she found herself wondering what he was thinking. Finally he spoke. "What's your real name?" "Sarah Martinez." "And what did those men want with you, Sarah Martinez?" She hesitated, realizing she was about to step even deeper into unknown territory, but there was no going back now. "I think they wanted to hurt me," she admitted. "Maybe worse." The pawnshop owner locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. Sarah watched him move with practiced efficiency, checking the windows and activating what looked like a sophisticated security system. The casual way he handled these precautions suggested this wasn't the first time he'd dealt with unwanted visitors. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to a worn leather chair near the back of the shop. Sarah obeyed, her legs suddenly feeling weak. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaky and confused. She studied the man as he poured himself a cup of coffee from a machine behind the counter. In the better light, she could see more details that made her stomach tighten with worry. The tattoos on his arms weren't random designs. They told stories. She recognized some military insignia, a few that looked like prison ink and symbols she couldn't identify, but that seemed significant. His movements were economical and controlled, like someone who had learned to conserve energy for when it really mattered. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. Jake Crowfeather." The name fit him somehow. Sarah filed it away, along with every other detail she could observe. If she was going to survive whatever she'd gotten herself into, she needed to understand this man. "Those men who were following you," Jake said, settling into a chair across from her. "You sure you don't know what they wanted?" Sarah shook her head. "I've never seen them before tonight. I was just walking to work when I noticed them behind me." "Where do you work?" "Murphy's Diner, about 6 blocks from here." "I'm a waitress," she paused. "Was a waitress? I'm probably fired now for not showing up." Jake's expression didn't change, but she caught something that might have been sympathy flicker across his features. "This neighborhood gets rough after dark. A lot of people looking for easy targets, and is that what I looked like? An easy target? Small woman walking alone, carrying a purse, looking scared." Jake shrugged. "Yes, you looked like an easy target." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I can take care of myself." "Right. That's why you begged a stranger to pretend he knew you." The words stung because they were true. Sarah had been taking care of herself since she was 16, when her mother died and left her with nothing but debt and an apartment she couldn't afford. She'd worked her way through 2 years of community college before running out of money, then bounced between jobs trying to keep her head above water. But tonight had shown her just how vulnerable she really was. "I'm grateful for what you did," she said carefully, "but I should probably go home now." Jake leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Where's home?" "About 12 blocks south of here. You planning to walk?" The question made Sarah's stomach drop. She hadn't thought about the journey home. Those men could be waiting anywhere along her route. She had enough money for bus fare, but the stops were poorly lit and often deserted this time of night. "I'll figure something out," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Those guys aren't done with you," Jake said bluntly. "Whatever they wanted, they're not going to give up just because I showed up once." Sarah felt cold dread settle in her chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean they followed you for a reason. Could be random, wrong place, wrong time. Could be they think you saw something you shouldn't have. Could be someone sent them specifically after you." Jake's dark eyes never left her face. Any of those sound familiar? Sarah tried to think. Her life was so routine, so unremarkable. Work, home, sleep, repeat. She didn't have enemies or secrets or any reason for someone to target her specifically. I can't think of anything, she said. I keep to myself. I don't cause trouble. What about at work? Any customers who seemed too interested in you? Anyone asking personal questions? Sarah considered this. Murphy's Diner attracted all kinds of people. Construction workers, office employees, truck drivers, and less savory characters who kept to themselves in the back booths. But one face did stand out in her memory. There was this guy, she said slowly. He's been coming in for the past 2 weeks. Always orders the same thing, always sits at table 12. He watches me more than seems normal. Describe him. Average height, maybe 40 years old. Brown hair, kind of thin on top. Wears nice clothes but not flashy. He always pays cash and tips exactly 15%. Jake nodded as if this information meant something to him. Ever see him anywhere else? Outside the diner? No, I don't think so. Sarah paused. Why? Do you think he's connected to those men? Maybe, maybe not. But if someone's been watching you, studying your routine, they'd know exactly where to find you. Jake stood up and walked to one of the windows, peering through a gap in the blinds. They'd know what time you get off work, which route you take home. The implication hit Sarah like a physical blow. You think this was planned? I think you need to be very careful for the next few days. Jake turned back to her. Is there somewhere else you can stay? Family, friends? Sarah's laugh was bitter. I don't exactly have a strong support network. My mom died when I was a kid, never knew my dad. I've got a few acquaintances, but nobody I could ask to let me hide out at their place. Jake was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his options. When he spoke, his voice carried a reluctance that made Sarah nervous. You can stay here tonight, he said finally. There's a couch in the back room and the security system is better than what most banks have. Sarah stared at him. I can't do that. I don't even know you. You knew me well enough to ask me to save your life an hour ago. That was different. That was desperation. And this isn't. Jake's tone was matter of fact. Look, lady, I'm not trying to be your knight in shining armor, but if those guys come back and find out you lied about knowing me, we're both going to have problems. Sarah felt the truth of this settle over her like a weight. By involving Jake in her crisis, she had created a connection between them whether she wanted one or not. Those men now saw him as an obstacle, which made him a target. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't think about the consequences when I asked for your help. Too late for sorry now. Jake moved toward the back of the shop. Question is, what are we going to do about it? Sarah followed him into a small room that served as both office and living space. There was a desk covered with paperwork, a mini fridge, a microwave, and a couch that had seen better days. The walls were covered with photographs. Some looked like family, others showed Jake in military uniform with other soldiers. Were you in the army? She asked. Marines. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Jake pulled a blanket from a closet and tossed it onto the couch. Bathrooms through that door. There's a lock on this room, but you won't need it. Nobody gets through the front of the shop without setting off enough alarms to wake the dead. Sarah sat on the edge of the couch, feeling overwhelmed. This is crazy. Yesterday I was just a waitress worried about making rent. Now I'm hiding in a pawn shop from men who want to hurt me, and I've dragged a complete stranger into it. Jake paused in his preparations, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. For what it's worth, I don't think you're just an innocent bystander who got unlucky. What do you mean? I mean, I've seen enough trouble to recognize it when it walks through my door. And you, Sarah Martinez, walked in carrying more trouble than you know. Jake led Sarah down a narrow staircase she hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a false wall in his office. The basement was larger than the shop above, with concrete walls and industrial lighting. But what caught Sarah's attention were the contents: workbenches covered with electronic equipment, walls lined with weapons, and filing cabinets that looked like they belonged in a government office. Welcome to my real business, Jake said, noting her shocked expression. Sarah walked slowly through the space, taking in details that painted a picture of someone far more dangerous than a simple pawnshop owner. There were surveillance monitors showing multiple camera angles of the street above, communications equipment that looked military-grade, and enough weapons to outfit a small army. What is this place? She asked. Insurance, information, emergency supplies. Jake moved to one of the workbenches and activated a computer system. When you leave the kind of life I used to live, you don't just walk away clean. You need leverage to keep your former associates from deciding you're a liability. And Roberto Martinez knows about this? He knows I have something on him. He doesn't know what or where. Jake's fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. But that's about to change. Sarah watched as files appeared on the screen. Financial records, photographs, audio recordings. Even from her limited vantage point, she could see names and numbers that clearly represented something significant. This is your insurance policy? 5 years of detailed records of Roberto's operation. Money flows, drug shipments, murders, bribes to public officials. Jake's voice was matter-of-fact. Enough evidence to put him and 24 of his associates away for life. Why haven't you turned it over to the police? Jake gave her a look that suggested the question was naive. Because half the names in these files belong to cops, judges, and city officials. Roberto didn't build his operation by avoiding the system. He built it by owning pieces of the system. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the basement. So who can we trust? We trust ourselves, and maybe 1 or 2 people I know who are clean. Jake pulled out a cell phone and dialed a number. Marcus, it's Jake. I need to call in a favor. Sarah listened to Jake's side of a conversation that seemed to be conducted in code. He mentioned the old problem and new complications and moving to endgame. When he hung up, his expression was grim. Help is coming, but it's going to take time to set up, he said. In the meantime, we need to make Roberto think twice about coming after us directly. How do we do that? Jake moved to another computer and began typing rapidly. We give him a preview of what happens if he pushes too hard. A little demonstration of how much trouble we can cause him. Sarah watched as Jake accessed what looked like news websites and social media accounts. His fingers flew across the keyboard with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. What are you doing? Sending a message. Roberto's construction company is bidding on a major city contract next week. The kind of deal that would make him millions and give him access to even more opportunities for money laundering. Jake's smile was cold. But if certain information about his past business practices were to become public, Sarah saw Jake upload files to what looked like a journalist's secure email account. You're leaking information to the press? Just enough to make Roberto nervous. Show him that I can reach his legitimate business interests, not just his criminal ones. Jake finished his work and turned to face her. This should buy us some breathing room while we figure out our next move. What about me? What about the records Roberto thinks my mother left behind? Jake considered this. We need to find out if your mother actually did leave something behind. Even if you don't know about it, there might be something hidden that Roberto's people could find. Sarah thought about the months after her mother's death, the rushed sale of furniture and belongings, the boxes of papers she had sorted through, the personal items she had kept as mementos. I kept some of her things, she said slowly. Personal stuff, photos, jewelry, books. They're in storage. Where? A unit about 10 miles from here. I pay the rent every month, but I haven't been there in over a year. Jake nodded. We need to check it out. If your mother did hide something, that's the most likely place. Is it safe? Going there, I mean. Safer than leaving it unchecked. If Roberto's people think there might be something valuable in that storage unit, they'll find a way to search it eventually. Better we get there first. Sarah felt the weight of decisions she didn't want to make. Every choice seemed to lead deeper into a world of violence and uncertainty. But the alternative, waiting for Roberto's men to find her, was worse. Okay, she said. But I want to understand something first. You said you used to work for people like Roberto. What exactly did you do for them? Jake was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could see him weighing how much truth to share. I was what they call a cleaner. When problems arose that couldn't be handled through normal channels, they called me. What kind of problems? People who knew too much. Witnesses who might testify. Business rivals who wouldn't cooperate. Jake's voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the weight of old guilt beneath the words. I was very good at making problems disappear. Sarah felt sick. You killed people? Yes. The simple honesty of the answer was somehow more disturbing than any elaborate explanation would have been. Sarah stared at this man who had saved her life, trying to reconcile the person who had shown her kindness with the killer he had just admitted to being. Why did you stop? She asked. Because I realized I had become the kind of problem that people like me were hired to solve. When you cross certain lines often enough, you stop being useful and start being dangerous. Jake moved toward the stairs. Roberto knew it was only a matter of time before I became more liability than asset. So I made sure I had something to keep him from making that calculation. Sarah followed him upstairs, her mind spinning with implications. How many people did you kill? Jake paused at the top of the stairs. Enough to know I don't want to kill anymore. But not so many that I've forgotten how if it becomes necessary. The implicit threat in his words wasn't lost on Sarah. She was under the protection of a man who had killed for money, who still had the skills and inclination to kill for survival. The question was whether that protection was worth the risk of being associated with someone so dangerous. I need to ask you something, she said as they reached the main shop. Are you planning to kill Roberto Martinez? Jake's answer was immediate and chilling in its simplicity. If he gives me no choice, yes. Sarah realized she was past the point of turning back. Roberto's men were hunting her for something she might not even possess. The police couldn't protect her from an organization with tentacles throughout the system. And the only person offering her a chance of survival was a former assassin with his own deadly agenda. What happens to me when this is over? She asked quietly. Jake looked at her with an expression that might have been sympathy. That depends on how it ends, and whether you can live with the things we might have to do to survive. Sarah felt the last of her old life slip away. The waitress who worried about rent and tardiness was gone, replaced by someone who had to make impossible choices just to see another sunrise. When do we go to the storage unit? She asked. Tonight, after dark. We'll need every advantage we can get. Sarah woke to the sound of muffled voices coming from the front of the pawn shop. Pale morning light filtered through the small window in the back room, and for a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The men following her, Jake's intervention, the uneasy night spent on a stranger's couch. She checked her phone. 7:30 in the morning. She had slept better than expected considering the circumstances. But her body ached from the unfamiliar sleeping surface. The voices from the front room grew louder, and she could distinguish Jake's deep tones from at least two other male voices. Sarah crept to the door and listened. The conversation was too muffled to make out words, but the tone sounded serious rather than threatening. After a few minutes, she heard the front door chime and the voices fade. Footsteps approached the back room. You awake? Jake called through the door. Yes. Is everything okay? Come out here. We need to talk. Sarah ran her hands through her hair and tried to make herself presentable. When she emerged from the back room, she found Jake sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee and a grim expression. Who was that? She asked. Customers. Early birds looking for specific items. Jake gestured to a chair. But that's not what we need to discuss. I made some calls last night after you went to sleep. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. What kind of calls? The kind that helped me understand what I've gotten myself into. Jake's dark eyes studied her face. Tell me about your mother, Sarah. The question caught her off guard. My mother? Why would you ask about her? Because I think her death might not have been as natural as you believe. Sarah stared at him, feeling the blood drain from her face. What are you talking about? She died of cancer. I was there with her at the hospital. Maria Elena Martinez, age 38, died at Denver General Hospital 6 years ago. Official cause of death, complications from liver cancer. Jake pulled out a folder and opened it on the counter. But before she got sick, your mother worked for some very interesting people. Sarah's legs felt weak. She gripped the back of the chair to steady herself. How do you know her name? How do you know any of this? I have friends who are good at finding information. Your mother worked as a bookkeeper for Martinez Construction. Jake paused significantly. No relation to you despite the name. The company was owned by Carlos Martinez, who ran a very profitable side business moving drugs and money through his construction projects. That's impossible. Sarah shook her head violently. My mother was honest. She would never work for criminals. Maybe she didn't know at first. Maybe she figured it out and tried to leave. Maybe she saw something she shouldn't have. Jake's voice was gentle but relentless. 3 months before she got her cancer diagnosis, the FBI raided Martinez Construction. They found evidence of money laundering, drug trafficking, and worse, but they never found the detailed financial records that would have tied everything together. Sarah sank into the chair, her mind reeling. You think my mother had those records? I think your mother was the only person who understood how Carlos Martinez was moving his money. I think when the FBI got close, she became a liability. Jake leaned forward. And I think the cancer that killed her wasn't cancer at all. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She thought about her mother's final months, the rapid deterioration, the doctors who seemed puzzled by how quickly the disease progressed, the way her mother had insisted on handling all her own medications. Even if that's true, Sarah said shakily, what does it have to do with what happened last night? Carlos Martinez has been dead for 3 years. I read about it in the papers, heart attack. Carlos is dead, but his organization isn't. His nephew Roberto Martinez took over the business. And apparently Roberto thinks your mother might have left something behind. Something that could destroy what's left of his operation. Sarah felt sick. Like what? Records. Account numbers. Names of people who helped move money. The kind of information that would be worth a lot to the right people. Jake paused. Or dangerous to the wrong people. I don't have anything like that. When my mother died, I sold everything just to pay her medical bills. The apartment was cleaned out completely. Roberto doesn't know that, and even if he did, he might not believe it. Jake's expression was grave. Those men following you last night, they work for Roberto Martinez. I recognize them from photos my contact showed me. Sarah stared at him, struggling to process this information. How do you know so much about these people? How do you have contacts who can get FBI files and criminal records overnight? Jake was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah sensed she had asked a question he didn't want to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her nervous. I used to work for people like Roberto Martinez, he said simply. The words hung in the air between them like a live wire. Sarah felt her perception of Jake shift dramatically. The military bearing, the casual competence with security systems, the way he had handled the confrontation last night. It all made terrible sense now. What kind of work? She asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. The kind that taught me how to read people, how to handle problems, how to make things disappear when they needed to disappear. Jake's eyes never left her face. I was good at it. Too good. Sarah pushed back from the counter, every instinct telling her to run. But where could she go? The men hunting her were still out there, and now she knew they were connected to a criminal organization with resources and motivation to find her. Why are you helping me? She asked. If you used to work for people like Roberto Martinez, why would you risk yourself for a stranger? Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street. Because I know what these people are capable of. Because I've done things for them that I'm not proud of. And because maybe helping you is a way to balance the scales. So this is about your guilt? Maybe. Or maybe it's about the fact that you're not the only one Roberto Martinez wants to hurt. Jake turned back to her, and Sarah saw something dangerous flicker in his dark eyes. You see, when I left that life, I took some insurance with me. Information that could put Roberto and his whole operation away for life. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet again. You're telling me that both of us are targets. I'm telling you that Roberto Martinez has 2 problems he wants to solve. The records your mother might have hidden and the evidence I've been holding over his head to keep him from coming after me. Jake's smile was cold and sharp. Funny how we ended up in the same place at the same time. This isn't a coincidence, is it? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. No. Roberto's been watching you, trying to figure out if your mother left you anything useful, and he's been watching me, waiting for an opportunity to eliminate the threat I represent. Jake moved back to the counter. When his men followed you last night, they were probably planning to grab you and use you as leverage against me. Force me to give up my insurance in exchange for your safety. But I ruined that plan by running into your shop. You complicated it anyway. Now Roberto knows we're connected, which means he can't move against either of us without risking the other one exposing him. Jake paused. Unless he eliminates both of us at the same time. Sarah felt trapped between impossibilities. She could run, but Roberto's people would find her eventually. She could go to the police, but what proof did she have? And even if they believed her, how long would it take for Roberto to reach her in protective custody? What do we do? She asked quietly. Jake's expression was grim but determined. We do what people like us have to do when the system can't protect us. Which is? We protect ourselves, by any means necessary. The storage facility sat on the outskirts of Denver like a small fortress of metal buildings and security fences. Jake parked his truck 3 blocks away, and they approached on foot through industrial areas where streetlights were sparse and shadows provided cover. Sarah's unit was in the back section, away from the main office and security cameras. Your mother was smart, Jake observed as they moved through the rows of storage units. This location is isolated enough to discourage casual thieves, but not so secure that it would attract attention from people looking for hidden valuables. Sarah's hands shook as she worked the combination lock on Unit 47B. She hadn't been here since the 6-month anniversary of her mother's death, when grief had driven her to sort through boxes of memories she wasn't ready to face. Now she was returning under circumstances she never could have imagined. The metal door rolled up with a rusty squeal that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet night. Jake played a flashlight beam across the contents while Sarah stood frozen in the doorway. The unit was exactly as she had left it. Boxes stacked against the walls, furniture covered with old sheets, and in the back corner, her mother's old desk. "Tell me about her work habits," Jake said, stepping into the unit. "Was she organized? Did she keep files at home?" Sarah followed him inside, breathing air that still held faint traces of her mother's perfume. She was very organized. Everything had its place. But she never brought work home. She said home was for family, not business. Jake nodded, examining the desk. It was a simple wooden piece with 4 drawers and a hutch on top. Except she might have made an exception if she realized she was in danger. They worked systematically through the boxes. Most contained exactly what Sarah expected. Photo albums, clothing, books, kitchen items her mother had collected over the years. But Jake approached each container with the thoroughness of someone who understood how people hid things. "Your mother's jewelry box," he said, lifting a carved wooden container from one of the boxes. "Where did she keep this?" "On her dresser. She opened it every morning when she put on her watch and earrings." Sarah watched as Jake examined the box carefully, running his fingers along the edges and testing the weight. "Why?" "Because jewelry boxes are classic hiding places. Secret compartments, false bottoms." Jake found what he was looking for, a small section on the bottom that gave slightly when pressed. Bingo! The hidden compartment revealed a small key attached to a plastic tag with numbers written in Maria Martinez's careful handwriting. Jake held it up to the flashlight beam. "Safety deposit box," he said. "First National Bank, box number 1247. Sarah stared at the key. "I never knew she had a safety deposit box. When she died, the lawyer went through all her papers. There was no mention of it. She probably paid for it under a different name or paid cash to avoid leaving a paper trail." Jake pocketed the key. "This is what Roberto's been looking for. Not records hidden in your apartment or storage unit, but whatever your mother felt was important enough to lock away in a bank vault." A sound from outside the storage unit made both of them freeze. Footsteps on gravel, moving with the careful rhythm of people trying to be quiet. Jake immediately switched off the flashlight and motioned for Sarah to move behind the stacked boxes. "How many entrances to this facility?" he whispered. "2 that I know of. Main gate and an emergency exit near the back fence." Jake drew a gun from inside his jacket, the movement so smooth Sarah barely saw it happen. "They probably have both covered. We need to assume they've been watching and waiting for us to lead them here." The footsteps grew closer, and Sarah could hear voices speaking in Spanish. She caught enough words to understand they were discussing positions and timing. These weren't random thieves. They were professionals conducting a coordinated operation. "How many?" Jake whispered. Sarah listened carefully. "At least 3 different voices. Maybe more." Jake nodded grimly. The storage unit was a trap. Only one way in or out, and Roberto's men controlled the approach. But Jake seemed more angry than worried. "They made a mistake," he said quietly. "They should have waited until we left and then searched the unit themselves. By cornering us here, they've given up their advantage." "What advantage did they have?" "Patience. Time to plan. The ability to pick when and where to make their move." Jake checked his weapon and pulled out what looked like a small explosive device. "Now they're committed to a fight. In an enclosed space where I have cover and they have to come to me." Sarah watched in fascination and terror as Jake transformed from the conflicted man she had been getting to know into something efficient and deadly. His movements became economical, his breathing steady, his eyes constantly scanning for threats and opportunities. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "Stay behind those boxes and don't move unless I tell you to. If shooting starts, get as low as possible and cover your head." Jake paused. "And if something happens to me, take this key and run. Get to the bank, see what your mother left, and use it to buy your safety." Before Sarah could respond, a voice called out from the entrance to the storage unit. "Jake Crow Feather, we know you're in there. Roberto wants to talk." Jake's response was calm and conversational. Roberto knows where to find me if he wants to talk. He doesn't need to send boys with guns. You have something that belongs to him. And the girl has something too. Make this easy on everyone. The girl doesn't have anything Roberto needs. Let her walk away and we can discuss whatever Roberto thinks I owe him. Sarah heard movement outside, footsteps spreading out to surround the unit. Through a gap in the boxes, she could see shadows moving past the entrance. Jake had been right. This was a coordinated operation with multiple men. You're not in a position to negotiate, the voice called out. Come out now or we come in shooting. Jake smiled and Sarah saw something that made her blood chill. This was a man who enjoyed violence, who had found his element in the threat of death. Whatever guilt he felt about his past hadn't changed his fundamental nature. You're welcome to try, Jake called back. But I should mention, the storage units on either side of this one are empty and the walls are thin metal. Think carefully about where those bullets are going to go when you miss. There was a pause in the conversation outside, and Sarah realized Jake was buying time while he prepared for whatever came next. He had positioned himself near the entrance with a clear view of anyone who tried to enter, while using the boxes and furniture as cover. Last chance, the voice outside said. Roberto doesn't want to hurt the girl, but he will if that's what it takes. Jake's response was to pull the pin on the small device he had been holding and toss it toward the entrance of the storage unit. Sarah had time to see it roll into the open before Jake was diving toward her, pushing her down behind the boxes as the world exploded in light and sound. The flashbang grenade did exactly what it was designed to do, temporarily blind and disorient everyone in the vicinity. Sarah felt Jake's weight on top of her as he shielded her from the worst of the blast. Then he was moving again, flowing toward the entrance with deadly purpose. The gunfire that followed was brief and precise. Jake's shots were controlled, aimed, professional. The return fire was wild and panicked. Men shooting at shadows while their vision cleared and their hearing returned. When the shooting stopped, Jake was still moving, checking the fallen men and securing their weapons. Sarah remained behind the boxes, her ears ringing and her heart hammering against her ribs. Clear, Jake called softly. But we need to move fast. That noise will bring attention we don't want. Sarah emerged from behind the boxes to find Jake standing over 3 bodies. He was bleeding from a graze on his left arm, but otherwise seemed uninjured. The storage unit looked like a war zone. Are they dead? She asked. 2 are. The 3rd will live if he gets medical attention soon. Jake was already moving toward the back of the unit, gathering the items they had found. We need to leave, now. Sarah followed him out of the storage facility, stepping carefully around the bodies of men who had been alive minutes before. She should have felt horror, revulsion, something human and normal. Instead, she felt only a strange detachment, as if she were watching someone else's life unfold. Where are we going? She asked as they reached Jake's truck. First National Bank. Whatever your mother left in that safety deposit box. It's important enough that Roberto just lost 3 men trying to get it. Jake started the engine and pulled away from the storage facility. And I want to know what's worth that kind of price before Roberto decides to raise the stakes even higher. Sarah looked back as they drove away, seeing lights coming on in nearby buildings as people responded to the gunfire. Soon the area would be crawling with police and Roberto would know that his men had failed. What happens when Roberto finds out we killed his people? She asked. Jake's expression was grim. Then we find out just how far he's willing to go to get what he wants. And we hope your mother left us something we can use to stop him. First National Bank opened at 8 in the morning, and Jake had positioned them across the street an hour earlier to watch for any sign of Roberto's people. The safety deposit box key felt heavy in Sarah's pocket as she observed the normal flow of customers and employees beginning their day. After the violence of the night before, the mundane routine of banking seemed surreal. No surveillance that I can see, Jake reported, lowering a pair of binoculars. But Roberto's smart enough to keep his people at a distance until we're inside. Sarah had spent the sleepless hours since leaving the storage facility trying to prepare herself for whatever they might find in her mother's safety deposit box. Bank records that proved money laundering, evidence of crimes that could destroy lives, or perhaps just personal documents that Roberto's paranoia had elevated to dangerous importance. What if it's nothing? She asked. What if my mother just kept important papers there and Roberto is wrong about what she knew? Then we've got a bigger problem, Jake said grimly, because Roberto isn't going to believe us. He'll keep coming until he's satisfied there's nothing left to find. They crossed the street at exactly 8:15, when the bank was busy enough to provide cover but not so crowded that they would be trapped by the crowd. Jake had changed into a business suit that made him look respectable rather than dangerous, while Sarah wore clothes that suggested a grieving daughter handling her mother's affairs. The safety deposit box access required 2 keys, the one they had found, and a bank key held by the vault attendant. Sarah's hands trembled as she signed the access log using her real name, knowing that signature would leave a trail Roberto could follow. Box 1247 was larger than Sarah had expected, big enough to hold documents, photographs, and other items. The vault attendant left them alone in a small private room, and Sarah opened the box with hands that shook despite her efforts to stay calm. Inside were 3 manila envelopes, each sealed and labeled in her mother's precise handwriting. The first was marked insurance and contained copies of financial records, account numbers, and transaction details that clearly showed money being moved through Martinez, construction and patterns that suggested illegal activity. The second envelope was labeled protection and held photographs. Roberto Martinez, meeting with known drug dealers, handing envelopes to city officials, and in one particularly damning shot, standing over what appeared to be a dead body in an industrial setting. But it was the third envelope that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was marked Justice and contained a detailed confession written in her mother's hand, describing her growing awareness of Roberto's criminal activities and her decision to document everything she discovered. The confession was dated 3 weeks before her cancer diagnosis. She knew, Sarah whispered, scanning the pages of careful handwriting. She knew Roberto was going to kill her, and she prepared for it. Jake read over her shoulder, his expression growing darker with each page. Your mother was braver than Roberto gave her credit for. She didn't just discover his operation, she systematically documented it. The confession detailed years of criminal activity, including specific dates, amounts, and methods used to launder money through the construction business. But more importantly, it named names, police officers, judges, city council members, and federal officials who had taken bribes or looked the other way. This could destroy Roberto's entire network, Jake said. No wonder he's been searching for it. Sarah continued reading, and her heart stopped when she reached the final pages. Her mother had not only documented Roberto's crimes, she had also recorded Jake's activities as Roberto's enforcer. Every job, every target, every death was cataloged with the same careful precision. She knew about you too, Sarah said quietly, showing Jake the relevant pages. Jake read his own history in Maria Martinez's handwriting, his face showing no emotion as he absorbed the detailed record of his crimes. She was thorough. Even documented things I thought nobody knew about. Does this change anything between us? Jake considered the question seriously. Your mother was protecting you the only way she knew how. She couldn't go to the police because too many of them were compromised. She couldn't run because Roberto would have found her. So she created a weapon that could only be used after her death. And now we have that weapon. Jake agreed. The question is whether we're brave enough to use it. Sarah felt the weight of her mother's sacrifice settling on her shoulders. Maria Martinez had died slowly and painfully, maintaining her silence while she was poisoned, all to ensure her daughter would have protection when Roberto finally came looking for his missing records. What do we do with this? Sarah asked. We end this. Today, before Roberto escalates beyond the point where these documents can protect us. Jake gathered the materials and returned them to their envelopes. But first, we need to make copies and get them to people who can act on the information. They left the bank with the original documents, knowing Roberto's people were almost certainly watching. Jake's plan was simple but dangerous. Use the evidence to force Roberto into a public confrontation where violence would bring unwanted attention to his operation. He'll meet with us if he thinks we're ready to deal, Jake explained as they drove toward downtown Denver. Roberto's ego won't let him back down from a direct challenge, especially after losing men last night. Sarah called Roberto's office from a payphone, identifying herself and requesting a meeting to discuss her mother's records. The response was immediate. Roberto would see them at his construction company office in 2 hours. He's confident, Jake observed. Probably thinks he can intimidate us into handing over everything and then eliminate us quietly. Can he? Jake's smile was cold and professional. He can try, but your mother gave us something he doesn't expect us to have. What's that? the complete truth, and the courage to use it. They spent the intervening time making copies of the documents and distributing them to journalists, federal investigators, and reform-minded officials whose names appeared on Maria Martinez's list of honest people. By the time they arrived at Martinez Construction, the evidence was already in the hands of people who could act on it. Roberto Martinez was waiting for them in his office, a man in his 50s with silver hair and expensive clothes that couldn't hide the predator underneath. 2 bodyguards flanked his desk while others waited outside the office. "Sarah Martinez," Roberto said with false warmth. "You look so much like your mother." Maria was a beautiful woman. She was a smart woman too, Sarah replied, surprising herself with her steady voice. "Smart enough to document everything she learned about your business." Roberto's smile faltered slightly. "Your mother worked for me for 3 years. She kept books, processed invoices, handled payroll. Nothing more." Jake placed one of the manila envelopes on Roberto's desk. "Then you won't mind looking at what she really kept track of." Roberto opened the envelope and began reading, his face growing pale as he absorbed the scope of what Maria Martinez had documented. The photographs made him curse in Spanish, and the financial records caused his hands to tremble. "Where did you find this?" he demanded. "Where she left it for us to find," Sarah said, along with instructions for what to do if anything happened to her. "What instructions?" Jake answered. "Copies of everything in this room have already been delivered to federal investigators, news organizations, and reform candidates in next month's election. Maria Martinez's confession is front-page news tomorrow morning, whether we walk out of here alive or not." Roberto's carefully controlled mask slipped, revealing the violent man underneath. "You have no idea what you've done. These records implicate dozens of people, officials who can make problems disappear, judges who can dismiss cases, prosecutors who know which charges to file, officials who will throw you to the wolves to save themselves once this becomes public." Jake corrected. "Your network only works in the shadows. In daylight, everyone will be looking for someone to blame." Sarah watched Roberto calculate his options, seeing him realize that killing them would only make the situation worse. The evidence was already in circulation. Their deaths would only confirm its authenticity, and his carefully constructed empire was collapsing whether he liked it or not. "What do you want?" Roberto asked finally. "We want to disappear," Jake said. "Permanently. No more hunting Sarah for records that are already public. No more threats against people who can't fight back. And what guarantee do I have that there isn't more evidence hidden somewhere?" Sarah stepped forward, feeling her mother's courage flowing through her. "You have my word that we've turned over everything Maria Martinez left behind. But you also have the certainty that if anything happens to either of us, people will know exactly who to blame." Roberto stared at them for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You have 48 hours to disappear. After that, if I see either of you in Denver again, our agreement is void." Jake and Sarah left the office together, walking through a building full of men who wanted to kill them, but couldn't risk the consequences. Outside, the afternoon sun felt warm on Sarah's face, and she realized she was free for the first time since her mother's death.